In the summer of 2020, I quit my soul-crushing retail job after over a decade of selling myself short. The month after I quit that job, I quit using painkillers. But I didn't quit using Twitter. Usually when we think of class consciousness, we think in terms of the capitalist owners and the proletariat, or working class. Lumpenproletariat are those who can't even be classified as workers. They're seen as lazy and useless, the dregs of society, in excess that everyone would rather just go away, f*** off, be deported, etc. According to Wikipedia, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels defined the lumpenproletariat as an essentially parasitical group, largely the remains of older, obsolete stages of social development, in that it could not normally play a progressive role in history. Indeed, because it acted only out of socially ignorant self-interest, the lumpenproletariat was easily bribed by reactionary forces and could be used to combat the true proletariat in its efforts to bring about the end of bourgeois society. Without a clear class consciousness, the lumpenproletariat could not play a positive role in society. Instead, it exploited society for its own ends, and was in turn exploited as a tool of destruction and reaction. Seems like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels didn't have a very high opinion of lumpenproletariats. So, a lumpenproletariat can then be defined as someone who just chooses not to work. I would prefer not to work. I would prefer not to sacrifice my body and time in exchange for things I don't need when I'm not stressed out and don't have any time. We live under this constant stress to consume so we can recharge and therefore have the energy to return to work. We do this over and over and over in an infinitely repeating cycle, but instead of wanting to affirm like Nietzsche, you realize you simply hate your life and would rather die than continue contributing to the circle. I will discuss the professional managerial class in another video I'm currently working on, but to sum up real quick, there are two types of the PMC. One,
the woke left,
or hyper-identitarian left, whose primary mode is using their status as influencers to tell people what to believe and who to look down upon. I'm thinking of people like AOC, Destiny, and Matt Walsh. Whoops, that can't be right. Okay, well, let's put Matthew in the number 2 category. The merchant right. The merchant right are all those people not on the
woke left,
who either get to tell you about how woke the left is, or they get to tell you how rich you can become if you just follow their path to success. They also believe in manifest destiny, which is
I can now predict you.
You can also call this the libertarian class. The merchant right or libertarian right believe it is simply a given designated by God or manifest destiny that you were born to maximize profit and then invest that profit in order to circulate more capital. But what I want to talk about is the relationship between the consumer and the producer within the realm of the professional managerial class. The producer is simple in this case. It's the rich and hardworking woke left and merchant right who get to tell everyone else how to think and how to live their lives. The people who they're talking to are the consumers. So I'd like to talk to the consumers because those are my people. A consumer in this sense, what I'll call a capital C consumer, can either be a worker, an unemployed consumer, or both. A worker is defined as someone who does wage labor and gets paid for doing so. Examples being a cashier, an Amazon driver, or a server at a restaurant. But what about a consumer, lowercase c, because it's not all-encompassing? Let me just say this. I love making up my own rules as a philosopher. This is my dream, really, that someone uses my that someone someday might be making a YouTube channel using my capital C definition of what a consumer is. This is called a neologism, whatever that means. But what about a consumer? Where was I? What about a consumer who doesn't get paid a wage? In other words, what does work even mean anymore? We've reached a point in capitalism where you can be doom scrolling all day. You're obviously not getting paid for it. Well, maybe you are, but this would be the third example of a capital C consumer. But you need to do something with your life, so you might as well engage in the ecstasy of communication with your fellow travelers. You doom scroll and tweet and post stories on Instagram and send out TikToks because you want to feel normal like everyone else. You want to return to some kind of homeostasis, some kind of balance, but now you're doing it way too much and it's becoming an addiction. You're not getting paid for this, but in your consumption, you are producing or contributing and leaving yourself vulnerable to these social media platforms to mine your data. People smarter than me have highlighted how unethical this all is. I mean, just think of all the tech bros who don't allow their kids on social media. But what I'm pointing out simply is that late capitalism has seen a shift. A new condition has been created in which everyone is working all of the time. It's kind of wild that this quote was written over 60 years ago. The other example is a content creator. Could be YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, Kick. Do Zoomers still use Kick? I always thought that was funny. Like, what did Kick stand for? Was it like short for kicking it? Like kicking it with the homies? I am not, as of now, a content creator who gets paid. I would certainly be more likely to get paid if I made overtly woke left content or made a hard pivot to disparaging
the woke left,
aligning myself with the merchant right. That would be a wise strategy in order to get more views, subs, and potential capital for my channel. So before you call me lazy, disabled, or autistic, all adjectives I'll happily identify as because I'm not getting paid right now, but I am busting my ass for this channel. Whatever that's worth. I have to capture footage, write and rewrite scripts, create thumbnails, video edit, and perform in front of a microphone and camera. I am working just as hard as the worker who doom scrolls 8 hours a day so they too can participate in just how unfair this whole system is. The cruel irony is that I am doing all of this unpaid work in the hopes of YouTube hiring me, and technically I won't be hired until I reach some kind of milestone or plateau like 100,000 subscribers. I am building a profile or a resume for YouTube in the hopes that someday I might be hired, which is to say, earning the right to be paid a wage for my capturing, writing, video editing, and performing. That's not to mention all the time and money required so that you can invest in the right content creators and SEO strategies to pump out your content to the highest common denominator. What is CEO? I don't know, but I need to learn it.
And I don't care.
As of October 2024, the number of people officially unemployed in the United States is around 7 million, or 4.1%. In 2020, the number catapulted to roughly 23 million thanks to the phenomenon that was the Great Resignation, or quiet quitting. I was one of those 23 million, or was I? I mean, I technically work for my wife, who owns a small business, and that is the reason I was even able to quit my soul-crushing retail job in the first place. But our business ain't doing so great now, so I'm doing other things with my time, but one thing I'm not doing is getting paid a wage to live. So does that count as being unemployed? I feel like this number, this 4.1%, can't be right. I can't tell you how many stories I've heard of men in their 30s and 40s who have quit their jobs during COVID and either have their wives be the sole breadwinner of the family or they just go back to living at home with their parents. We're kind of like children in suspended animation where we don't feel like we have anything on offer, but we really, really, really want to be on Twitter or Instagram and consume. If you don't know what weaponized incompetence is, maybe this is the time to start looking it up. At any rate, I am forever grateful for my wife because had her small business not been flourishing at the time, I'd probably be dead. Okay, maybe not literally buried in the ground, but I'd definitely be dead on the inside. It wasn't until after I quit that I realized how miserable I'd truly been. The time I wasn't at work was spent at home multitasking by doom scrolling on my phone as Netflix played something I wasn't paying attention to. I didn't have time to because all I had the time to do was replay humiliating moments during my workday and then dread the next day of work. In other words, I was too stressed to do anything. Common among most people. I have a daughter coming into this world and it's like, okay, I gotta go get a job again. But what will happen to me if I end up getting a job I hate? I am terrified of the prospect of going back into the job market after years away of manager manipulation and worker competition. For the first time in my life, I had the time and energy to pursue things I actually wanted to do for long, repeatable blocks each day. I learned to create a lot of things, but the most important thing I learned to create were boundaries, but where I no longer found certain behavior from certain people in my life acceptable. Like how a boss treats you like shit and you just gotta eat it, because that's what you do when you work a job you hate. You tolerate. Fascist philosopher Martin Heidegger defined two modes of being in his seminal work Being and Time, which was released just a few short years before Germany plummeted into National Socialism. Present at hand and the ready to hand. The ready-to hand has everything to do with how it relates to equipment. No philosopher had thought of this. Usually you just think of philosophy being, I think, therefore I am, and that's all you need to know about the human condition. Think about the ready-to-hand in terms of living under capitalism. Everything has a use to it, and objects under capitalism can also be humans. So when you're hammering, the hammer is ready to hand. Because once you pick it up and start using it for its intended use, it withdraws and allows you to do the thing you want to do, namely hammering. And you too become ready to hand because through repetition, when you're hammering, what am I doing here? What am I doing the jerk off motion for? So when you're in the flow of hammering or when you're in the flow of jacking off, everything else is in the background. You're not really focusing on what you're doing. You're just in the flow of doing it. It becomes second nature. But what happens if the hammer becomes too heavy? Or, I don't know, your wrist gets a cramp because you're jerking off because you've been jerking off too much. The readiness to hand then becomes unreadiness to hand because now you're consciously aware of how heavy the hammer is or how painful your wrist has become because you've been jacking off too much. This unreadiness to hand creates a breakdown, which then transitions the ready to hand into the present at hand. So the present at hand are basically mental concepts, deadlocks in human thinking. All of Western philosophy prior to Heidegger was just mental concepts that distinguish between a subject and an object, or an inside world and an outside world. And we wonder why people are treated like objects. So let's use an example of the ready to hand when one person uses another vulnerable person as equipment. Quote, when we deal with entities ready to hand by using them and manipulating them, this activity is not a blind one. It has its own kind of sight by which our manipulation is guided and from which it requires its specific security. End quote. Imagine you're working in an office with your shitty boss, and that shitty boss is in an exceptionally miserable mood. He wants to take his frustration out on you by not only giving you orders, but insulting you in the process. He makes you ready to hand in his manipulation of the situation. And you might hate that motherfucker and start fantasizing all the ways you want to end his misery for him, but also his banality motivates you to get the job done in some perverse way because you already hate yourself more than you hate your shitty job or your shitty boss. And if you don't get the job done, he'll just replace you with someone who can and will take the abuse you're currently taking. And then things that should be ready to hand, like driving a car, become present at hand because you have to work that day and your shitty boss is going to be there. So you're going to be extra aware of driving the car to work. So now you're hyper-focused on driving to work instead of it being something that's ready to hand and in the background. And you only slept for 2 hours the night before because all you could think about was how much you hate your job and how humiliating it is and you run through all these scenarios in your head of all the times you might have done something embarrassing at the job. And then you start to dread all the potentially embarrassing and terrible situations you might get into in the future. And you're not getting paid for any of this extra mental labor you're putting on yourself. You're bringing work home with you because you're creating all these present at hand concepts in your head of worst case scenarios that either could happen or have always already happened. And it's all your fault. So you're driving to work and you're nervous and you're angry and you're confused. And then you just start shaking. So driving has now become unreadiness to hand because you're very aware of everyone around you because you're afraid that if you don't focus, you're going to get into an accident. And you can't get into an accident because if you get into an accident, you'll be docked in your pay and then you'll be written up by your shitty boss. When you're driving normally and don't need to worry about your shitty job because you quit that motherfucker, you're in the flow. You can vibe to Beyonce or listen to an engrossing podcast while driving becomes second nature, but maybe a car in front of you is signaling to turn right, so you have to slow down. Okay, no problem. You're still ready to hand. You're still in a flow state. You're still listening to Beyonce, right where you need to be. Everything else is in the background. But what happens if that car cuts out in front of you, forcing you to slam on your brakes? Again, the unreadiness to hand creates the breakdown, and the breakdown forces you back into the present at hand.
Any other questions,
but this is the post-ironic problem.
No! Shut the fuck up! Shut up! Shut up! Okay? I am telling you!
Go to the...
I am telling you, I have meaningful relationships with human beings. I'm not in f***ing character all the time! So, you know.
Okay, so I am definitely not a normie. I don't know how to talk to most people for more than a few minutes because I have very niche interests. It is what it is, but what separates a normie from someone like me? My mind feels as if it's always ready to hand when I'm talking about something I want to talk about. But most of the time, I find myself trapped in conversations about things I don't know, like tearing down a kitchen. and having to know how water meters work and where the fuse box is. I'm not handy in any normal sense. I don't know how to fix a car, and I don't know how to make business deals. All that stuff just overwhelms and bores me, so my mind creates President-hand concepts like Descartes. So then the only thoughts I have are mud and guilt for not knowing how any of this shit is supposed to work. Making money comes so unnaturally to me, but as a man, I am always overcome with guilt when I am not earning a wage. So I have sublimated this guilt into making my entire waking life work. Every video game, movie, TV show, podcast, and lecture I consume is intended for one specific purpose. Not to relax or unwind, but to shape what I learned into something that I can share with y'all in hopefully a coherently entertaining way. But we live in a society in which men are still shamed, whether unconsciously or not, for wanting to pursue a life that isn't spent sacrificing their body in the name of God or manifest destiny. We need neurodivergent creators more than ever, especially with tech bros pushing the belief that anyone and anything can do art. But what AI is doing isn't art, it's copying. It's predication. And this is what happens when everyone and everything gets turned into an object, a predicate without feelings or desires or any real know-how other than the endless proliferation of capital. And if you're doing it without the funding or connections of the PMC, it's going to be doubly hard to do it full-time. Full-time. Can I even call it full-time when I'm literally working all of the time? I mean, what other choice do I have? I have to justify all this lifeless doom scrolling somehow. In his essay Free Time, Theodore Adorno admits he doesn't have hobbies because everything he loves to do in his free time gets transferred back to his work, namely writing and theorizing. I'm like him in that I want to be able to do the things I want to do, namely pursue the liberal arts, unburdened from the expectation of having to sell my labor power for money so that I can buy things I only need when I'm working a job I would prefer not to. What are those things? For me, it's alcohol, video games, vacations, and painkillers. All of which I'd sacrifice if I didn't have to work another second of forced wage labor. But that's precisely the point. This is why wage labor exists, even when we now have the means to render work irrelevant with automation. I'd be on board with Marx and Engels' liberation of work if it actually meant having a meaning in one's work, but there's no way you're going to convince me that this was all supposed to head towards a world where the only work that mattered was what a few rich Nepo babies talked about in a conference room for 3 minutes. It is no coincidence that I quit painkillers the same month I quit my soul-crushing retail job. I'm fleeing from the possibility of not having the time to capture footage, to read books, to engage in the liberal arts like a spoiled brat. But should this make me feel like a spoiled brat? Every content creator richer than me always says how it's never too late to pursue your passion, your dream, but that passion needs to be supplemented by sacrificing your body for a wage you wouldn't need if the job didn't make you feel so goddamn unhappy in the first place. That's why I will always stand for Chappell Roan, who went on stage at the Grammys and not only put the entire music industry on blast right in front of them, but actually acknowledged that she's one of the lucky few who, had her life been a little less lucky, could potentially have been spent disabled and with no purpose. Artists need time and space in order to create great works of art so people like us can feel a little less sane in this insane hyper-reality of endless advertising. There are two possibilities that can become actualities if you're forced into working a job you hate. One, you change who you are, placating your bosses and competing with your coworkers by piling onto the people who are doing less labor than you. Or you could become less human, just acting like everything is okay all the time while a barely detectable pulse runs through your life force. But you stifle any feeling because feeling under the conditions of work are wrong and therefore bad. Wait, aren't those just the same thing? Working a job you would rather not makes you inauthentic. And just for the record, I'm not saying working at Amazon or working at Costco or working at Starbucks as a barista is bad. If you like your job, that's perfectly fine. I'm not talking to the people who like their jobs, though. How many Einsteins, Newtons, Heideggers, Kojimas, Tarts, XCXs, Beyoncés, and Roans are stifling their potential right now because they're enduring a job they hate and therefore lack the time to harness their creative energies in the ways that would serve everyone better. I'm not anti-science, but the bitter reality is that science decisively won the battle against the arts, and we're all paying the consequences. Science has more than doubled our life expectancy, but what was all that added life for? Do we really want scrolling through X or Instagram, passing the time at our meaningless jobs to be our legacy? People no longer have culture. They might find a common signifier in football or identifying as anti-trans, but culture has become so atomized that we're all each in our hyper-contained echo chambers talking to no one but ourselves and doing so while living in fear that we'll be judged for deviating from the norm. Martin Heidegger was clearly uneasy when thinking about the German self. Historically, he knew the Greeks' lack of guilt had made them stupid, but then the Christians' overdose on guilt made them resentful. Fascism and communism were both phenomenons of the early 20th century. One used the nation-state to perpetuate the myth of a forever enemy. Today it is seen in the world of online forever debates between debate bros fueled by taurine and aspartame.
Something wrong with this medium.
What medium?
Like the whole thing that we all do. I feel like there's something wrong with it.
Like human communication?
No. Specifically like the online, the internet stuff, like the...
The other used the nation state for pushing the idea that work is historically and theoretically the objectively correct way to live. Everyone has a function. Whether you're a black man, a white woman, a white man, a trans woman, a trans man, a black woman, we are all working all of the time. So am I the dreaded lumpenproletariat Marx and Engels were so disgusted by? What I really think is that I'm a brat posing as an unemployed lumpen when my function is being a consumer for the professional managerial class. It's a transactional relationship in which I pay with my time and attention, and they provide me with what I should believe, who I should follow, and what unique individuality I should cultivate. And I'll be perfectly honest, I want to become part of the professional managerial class, because what other choice do I have? My dream is to become a content creator, but it's a small dream. It's not something I always love doing. I'd rather be spending time preparing to raise my kid or travel the world, but my guilt has driven me to this point of projection where I feel as though I owe something to someone. So this is my attempt at that. But the PMC are normies who don't know how to talk to normies who lack the capital and influence they do. Some people actually believe we've moved away from the aristocracy of kings and queens, but changing the conditions of the PMC feels just about as insurmountable as full-scale revolution. Their wealth is generational, built on the creation myth that the PMC was born out of the workers' movement of the 1960s, when really it was just privileged students who became hippies and who then became the suburban middle class. All I can do is sit in my ivory tower, or demolished kitchen, so I can have the time to think, but I also want to participate in the ecstasy of communication with other people once I'm tired of thinking and want to exit the ivory tower. But is this just contributing further to the forever debate? The PMC tell us to highlight our different identities. Problem is, our differences don't unite us. They atomize us into quarks in the void of space and time. Fractured communities, fractured selves. The medium has changed. The medium was the message. Now the medium is the massage. We are in the mass age, an age where the law of gravity is absolutely true. The great indifferent predicate known as the post-class fractured mass. The age in which we all ecstatically watch spectacles unfold on our screens, and we act like we hate them, when in reality, we wouldn't know what to do without them. The conditions no longer call for class consciousness, because we are too busy enjoying being entertained to be called a class. They now call for mass consciousness. Thanks for watching.